whether acts of God or the result of human error, disasters strike with lethal force. The news media make us aware of these catastrophes. But Hollywood thrusts us right into the middle of them. Coming up, we'll meet the stars and filmmakers who give us disastrous thrills from the safety of a theater seat. Learn how Pierce Brosnan and Linda Hamilton survived Dante's Peak. Experience the raging fury of Firestorm. And the underground explosions in daylight. Go behind the scenes of The Flood, starring Christian Slater and Morgan Freeman, and Twister with Helen Hunt and Bill Paxton. Journey back to the 1970s, the decade of such disaster films as The Towering Inferno, The Poseidon Adventure, and Earthquake. It's a world where catastrophe lurks around every turn and at a theater near you. When disaster strikes Hollywood. Movie Magic presents Disaster Strikes Hollywood. Disaster films. Action-packed, star-studded, big-budget extravaganzas that have been filling movie theaters since the earliest days of cinema. They provide audiences with a vicarious thrill, a close encounter with their greatest primal fears.
There's chaos, devastation everywhere.
The definition of a disaster movie, in essence, is people in jeopardy, multiple jeopardy. That's what it's about. It's about people who react to an overwhelming disaster in a variety of interesting ways.
Having to create large-scale chaos, including cataclysmic acts of nature, inspires filmmakers to push the science of visual effects to ever higher plateaus. How can filmmakers possibly replicate volcanoes, the most powerful destructive forces on Earth? Volcanoes can erupt with the energy of 6 million atomic bombs. These are actual volcanic eruptions. Such awesome displays of power have been the inspiration for some of Hollywood's biggest disaster films. Dante's Peak explodes onto the big screen with one of the most spectacular cinematic eruptions ever seen. Linda Hamilton stars as the mayor of a small town under volcanic assault.
Volcano takes many different forms. It isn't just lava rushing down a mountain, you know. There are pyroclastic clouds, there are floods and fires and just so much fun stuff.
Pierce Brosnan portrays a volcanologist from the U.S. Geological Survey.
They go out there and they put their lives on the line for people, for communities, in different parts of the world.
Volcanologists travel in teams to active volcanoes, assessing the likelihood or severity of eruptions.
They're a breed unto themselves, these people. A small tribe, as it were, who are fascinated and compelled to go into dangerous situations where they can lose their lives.
David Harlow, a retired volcanologist, was brought on as the technical consultant on Dante's Peak.
I think they did a great job in the film in portraying, one, how much those teams really want to contribute, get the right call, and get people out of the way to save lives.
In 1991, Harlow was among a team of volcanologists who saved 85,000 lives when he predicted that Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines was about to erupt. A massive evacuation took place. Within the next 24 hours, Pinatubo blew, raining ash and toxic clouds for miles. Dante's Peak director Roger Donaldson has always been fascinated by volcanoes.
There's, I think, an awesome sort of power that nature has in exploding volcanoes, and I think everybody's fascinated by that. And I've tried to make it very realistic.
In a real volcanic eruption, winds can disperse deadly hot ash for thousands of miles. But near the eruption site, it falls like snow in a blizzard. On the set of Dante's Peak, ash storms are generated through a variety of techniques, including air hoses and giant rotating bins that disperse ash from above. The ash is made from ground-up newspaper. While it is non-toxic, it can be an irritant.
I would have to do saline washes in the eyes after every take because the eyes would hurt so much. You would ultimately begin to taste it. You know, it would be in the sinuses and whatever, and you would start to taste the newspaper print and stuff. So it wasn't pleasant.
The glamorous world of filmmaking.
When? When does it start?
White.
Besides suffocating ash storms, the effects team had to create another deadly volcanic phenomenon known as a lahar. A lahar is a volcanic mudslide triggered by a mixture of melting snow and tons of hot ash. It flows like a river, uprooting full-grown trees in its path.
It's more the consistency of concrete. You know, it can float large boulders, houses, and take out bridges, erode away whole hillsides and things like that.
Americans experienced this deadly phenomenon in 1980. After 123 years of inactivity, Mount St. Helens, located in the Pacific Northwest, blew apart. The resulting lahars caused 57 deaths. They destroyed more than 200 homes and 185 miles of road. To create a lahar for Dante's Peak, Donaldson turns to visual effects supervisor Pat McClung and his team from Digital Domain.
That's always the hardest effect, is to reproduce reality. In a sense, it's sort of chaos. If you think about it, swirling winds and clouds and so forth are very chaotic. So it's hard to reproduce natural events, period.
In the movie, a killer lahar breaks through the town's dam. Filming the scene requires Digital Domain to build an enormous miniature set. On an airport tarmac in Los Angeles, the effects team constructs a quarter-scale dam that stands 40 feet high. Hundreds of artificial pine trees are used to dress the set, replicating the Northwest. At the top of the set is a tank holding 650,000 gallons, or 7 million pounds of water.
It was elevated, obviously, to get some gravity feeds, so the water would flow down and just come crashing through this valley set to give a huge amount of speed and volume to this raging river.
The water is dyed gray to simulate the liquid concrete look of a lahar. Bins full of branches are lifted to the elevated water tank. The branches are emptied into the tank, where they will be whisked away in the rushing waters. The dam will burst when explosives are detonated around a breakaway portion of the model, allowing the water to pour through. At a bank of on-set monitors, Roger Donaldson reviews the angles of his 7 cameras before calling for action. The first take succeeds, a rare occurrence for such a complex shot. Volcanoes have long captured the imagination of filmmakers. In 1907, movie audiences were awed by one of the first disaster films, Eruption of Vesuvius. By 1969, special effects had come a long way, as seen in one of Hollywood's landmark volcano films, Krakatoa, east of Java. Based on a catastrophic eruption in 1883, the volcanic blast and resulting tidal wave were recreated using miniature effects. Special effects supervisor Alex Weldon shot the scene inside an enormous water tank, using a plaster model for the volcano. The thick, boiling quality of lava is an especially difficult phenomena for effects artists to replicate. The filmmakers of Dante's Peak approached the problem from an entirely new direction. Though it appears to flow fast on their heels, the actors never see the lava during filming. It was created entirely inside computers at Digital Domain.
The centerpiece of the film, visual effects-wise, was the lava, and it had never been created, to my knowledge, like this.
Creating the computer-generated, or CG, lava required software developers Jim Rothrock and Hank Dreskel to write original software called a shader that applies the characteristics of lava to the moving forms created by the animators.
Along here. Yeah. There's some scenes where the lava looks very molten, or it's coming through the wall of the building and it looks all messy and yellow and red. And there's other scenes where you can very strongly see the crust, on the top of it and the cracks in between it and all that. And so the shader had to be able to mimic all the different kinds of lava.
From the bubbling, crusty flow of red-hot lava to the devastating lahar, Digital Domain's volcanic effects are not only thrilling, they could be a preview to a real-life disaster. 50 million, or almost 1 out of every 100 people in the world, currently live within lethal range of an active volcano.
I think this is great information for them to have, to really understand what can and might happen in those areas.
And unlike the denizens of Dante's Peak, who succumbed to nature's wrath, they still have a chance to escape such a catastrophe, if they heed the warnings of Hollywood's masters of disaster. A disaster here would be unthinkable. Running 100 feet below the Hudson River, the Holland Tunnel links New York City and New Jersey. Thousands of commuters use it every day. At some point, almost everyone ponders a nightmarish thought. What would happen if it collapsed? The makers of the urban disaster film Daylight show us. A horrific explosion inside an underwater tunnel leaves a small group of commuters trapped and struggling to survive.
Turn around and go back the way you came.
For director Rob Cohen, whose credits include the medieval fantasy Dragonheart, the survivors are the soul of the film.
Keep going, keep going.
But the heroes are the emergency medical services, or EMS teams, who risk their lives to rescue them.
I'm gonna try to find some help. You're our help.
I watched the Oklahoma City federal building bombing footage over and over and over again to watch these professionals and how they work and how they go in to try to mitigate a disaster. And I dedicated the film to the EMS people across the country, because somewhere between The accident and the emergency room are the EMS people who are first in line, first at the fire, first in the collapsed building. They're the ones taking your child out.
To accurately portray an EMS team's response to a major catastrophe, Cohen hired Chief Paramedic Paul Maniscalco as the technical consultant on Daylight. Maniscalco has helped save lives at dozens of disaster scenes.
Does it frighten you? Sure it does. There's a number of emotions that are going to run through your head. You know, are you going to get through this? But you learn to detach yourself emotionally from the event. You've been given the training, you've been given the tools, and hopefully you have the resources that are available to you to manage your way through this.
The inspiration for Daylight was this 1940s photograph. A chemical truck crashed and exploded inside the Holland Tunnel. While it did not destroy the tunnel, it served as a grim reminder of the potential for disaster. But long before filming began, director Rob Cohen had a problem. Where would he find a studio to accommodate his massive tunnel? At 1/3 of a mile, it would require construction of one of the longest sets ever made for a movie. It must allow for an array of explosive physical effects. The flood scenes require 1 million gallons of water and a filtration system to keep it clean. Cohen found the answer in Rome, Italy, at Cinecittà Studios, one of the largest film studios in the world. For 6 months, Cinecittà was transformed into a flooded vision of urban hell.
It was like going to war in a confined space. Everybody is on top of each other and wading towards each other in 4 feet of water or 15 feet of water with scuba divers moving the crew. We began to call ourselves the Tunnel Repertory Company.
False hope and now no hope. You've given us both, and for nothing.
This is truly underground theater.
For the flooding and other destructive on-set effects, Cohen turned to the man he relied on for Dragonheart, Kit West, Academy Award winner for Raiders of the Lost Ark.
You saw the cars and the stuff that we destroyed on that Daylight picture. It was terrible. I mean, it was frightening, but it was, one sort of gets a lift.
The initial explosion in Daylight triggers an overwhelming blast of oxygen-seeking fire that destroys nearly everything in its path. West was responsible for rigging multiple effects for the scene, including the flipping of a prison bus. The bus was mounted inside a rotisserie gimbal, a large mechanical wheel capable of rotating at a full 360 degrees. The horrifying finale of the explosion breaking out of the tunnel was also a full-scale effect designed by West.
We went to local demolition sites and had 2 or 3 ton slabs of concrete. We filled these into these enormous tanks held by cranes above the set, and they just dropped. Quite an amazing sight, actually, punching those cars down.
For scenes too dangerous to film full-size, a miniature version of the tunnel is built at effects facility Industrial Light and Magic in California. The challenge for visual effects supervisor Scott Farrar was to generate portions of the monstrous fire that roars through the tunnel.
Rob had some definite ideas about the explosion in the tunnel. He said he wanted it, he used the words character, he wanted it to be some sort of a fiery thing that had so much power that it would travel all the way down the tunnel.
Farrar's team accomplished the effect by rigging the quarter-scale model with a complex system of gas jets.
Pilot!
Since a miniature fire will appear to travel at a greater speed than a regular fire, Farrar must have precise control over each jet.
We could have 2 or 3 or 5 or 40 jets of kerosene being put out through the jets and literally nursing the fire along through the tunnel in a very articulated fashion, all driven by a computer that you can say, well, you know, jet number 3, can we retard that a 500th of a second? And those are the terms in which we'd speak.
Scott Farrar's miniature flames are later blended with on-set footage. The result on screen is a 4-minute-long scene of blazing terror. Daylight is Rob Cohen's first disaster film. But years earlier, he lived through a real disaster, coming within seconds of dying. In 1979, Cohen had a room on the 8th floor of the Copley Plaza Hotel in Boston. An arsonist set his floor on fire. 5 people died, and several others were badly injured. Ironically, it was a disaster film that helped save Cohen's life.
I remembered Towering Inferno. I remembered what they told you to do in that movie. I remembered to put the wet towels under the door. I remembered to keep low, and I stayed in the room until the fire broke through the wall.
Cohen crawled out on the ledge, knowing the fire would soon reach him. With only seconds to spare, a fire truck ladder was raised toward Cohen. Halfway down the ladder, he intersected a firefighter.
Like 15 seconds after I got on the ladder, the window blew up, and he covered me with his body and his coat. I never saw the guy's face. I don't know his name. I don't know who it was, this man who came up and saved me.
Rob Cohen considers Daylight to be more than an explosive disaster film. It's his tribute to these anonymous heroes, the men and women who risk their lives providing emergency services in the face of disaster. Movie audiences have been stampeding to disaster films ever since the silent era.
I think in a sense disaster movies are really escape. And as such, there's no time people don't want escapism. And that can be in good times or bad times, which is why we've had disaster movies all through the years.
Noah's Ark, 3 years in the making with a mighty cast of 10,000. One of the most costly films in Hollywood's history. See the rise of the...
One of the earliest and most spectacular disaster films burst onto the screen in 1929, Noah's Ark. The film was acclaimed for its effects. These included floating cameras, wind machines, and enormous dump tanks that completely submerged the sets. Stories about the dangers posed by those effects have become part of Hollywood lore.
There are all sorts of stories about people being injured on that film. It's known that Michael Curtiz, the director, was a man who was less concerned about the safety of his extras than he was with getting a great shot.
Beyond biblical epics, filmmakers found inspiration in 20th century disasters. San Francisco's 1906 earthquake killed thousands of people and virtually flattened the city. The tragedy was the subject of several popular films, but no one would recreate its destructive power as effectively as special effects artists James Basevi and A. Arnold Gillespie. Their 1936 classic, San Francisco, starred Clark Gable and Jeanette MacDonald.
What good filmmakers and special effects people like Gillespie and his colleagues knew was that things work best if you don't stare at them too long, too hard. So in San Francisco, they built sets that collapsed. They built floors that caved in. They did things with miniatures.
Gillespie would go on to win the second of his 4 special effects Oscars for Green Dolphin Street. Here, he staged an even bigger earthquake, along with a spectacular tidal wave. But if ever there were a Hall of Fame for Hollywood's masters of disaster, Irwin Allen would occupy an entire wing. The legendary producer-director transformed the 1970s into the decade of disaster with the first of his 2 mega hits, The Poseidon Adventure.
Let's go make a rehearsal.
Yeah, let's make a rehearsal.
You've all been marvelous. Just be patient a little while longer. I'll have you out in a minute.
Released in 1972, its famous cast included Gene Hackman,
Or to keep the air from coming in, or you can try to...
Shelley Winters, and Red Buttons.
You are now milling about and concerned.
The great appeal of the Poseidon Adventure at that time was that it was presenting something no one had ever seen before. A huge ship being turned upside down.
The film's topsy-turvy effects garnered Academy Awards for 2 of Allen's colleagues. L.B. Abbott for special photographic effects, and A.D. Flowers for mechanical effects.
Flowers! Print it!
Both would join Allen 2 years later on his next epic disaster, The Towering Inferno.
Okay, right action.
Once again, he assembled a famous ensemble cast, including Steve McQueen and Paul Newman.
Gotcha. This is what I'm worried about over here.
The tower itself, portrayed as the world's tallest building, was also a star. In establishing shots, the tower was actually a painting that was matted or optically inserted into film footage of the San Francisco skyline. A 70-foot tall model of the tower was set ablaze for the exterior scenes.
They're in the works now. All right, anytime now.
But the real action took place on a soundstage, where mechanical effects supervisor A.D. Flowers rigged a variety of convincing fire effects.
Take your fire down.
Towering Inferno was really as challenging a show as I've ever been on. Because there we had water, fire, and explosions and everything all at the same time. There was so many actors and people on the set while you're creating this that it also made it more difficult.
For several of the film's complex action sequences, Allen took on the directing responsibilities himself.
Everything burns here.
One of the most dangerous scenes involved stuntman Vince Dedrick Sr.
Absolutely quiet, please.
He would be set on fire in a scene that would stun audiences.
Roll cameras and action. Put it out. Don't let it get it now.
While the fire effects were unlike any seen before, no major injuries occurred on the set. A set where Irwin Allen was firmly in control.
After we roll the cameras, I will call for water. I will call action. I will count 1, 2, 3, and somewhere on the way to 10, a pistol shot will go off, and within 2 seconds after that, the big explosion will occur. We now have speed on all the cameras. Action! Bring up the fire! Okay! 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
The Towering Inferno was not only an outstanding spectacle, it was one of the few disaster films ever nominated for an Academy Award in the Best Picture category. It was also nominated for Best Special Effects. But the Oscar went to the effects team of another disaster epic, Earthquake. Glenn Robinson, Albert Whitlock, and Frank Brendel created major Los Angeles landmarks in miniature and then destroyed them for the big screen. earthquake presented an enormous challenge for the effects crew, it was a relatively light assignment for star Charlton Heston.
If you're lying in the pavement under a car and a block of concrete falls in the car next to you, there's no acting involved in that. It's not like playing the second soliloquy in Hamlet.
For Earthquake, it was the combination of both famous stars and groundbreaking effects that made it one of the most memorable events in the decade of disaster. They can turn the most tranquil stream into an unforgiving river of death and destruction. Flash floods are the #1 weather-related killer in the U.S. They cause billions of dollars in property damage every year. Grief-stricken families are forced to evacuate their homes as their lives are washed away. But this storm is a Hollywood special effect, and the very wet trooper is actor Randy Quaid, on location for the disaster thriller, The Flood. Christian Slater also stars as an armored truck guard pursued by hold-up man Morgan Freeman. Establishing shots filmed in Huntingburg, Indiana, utilize rain machines to simulate a downpour. Fire hydrants are opened to flood the streets. However, the majority of the film's action requires a far more complex illusion. Inside a huge airplane hangar located in California's Mojave Desert, the town of Huntingburg is being reconstructed. But this is not merely a soundstage. The construction is actually taking place inside a gigantic tank that will later be filled with 6 million gallons of water. Its purpose is to provide a safe and controllable method for flooding a small community. The tank is designed under the direction of special effects supervisor John Fraser, whose credits include Speed and Twister.
There'll be running water throughout the whole set, so it looks like that it's an actual flood. We have pumps that can generate up to 50,000 gallons a minute of water, which will be on constantly.
The tank is immense. It measures 300 feet by 600 feet. The water level always remains at 4 feet. In scenes that call for the floodwaters to increase, the bottom half of the sets are removed and the top half is lowered into its place. The result is a convincing illusion of a deepening flood.
At this level, we can walk in the water and move around. At 3 feet, we couldn't make the movie, and at 5 feet, you would have to swim from point A to point B, which would be time-consuming, and that really wears on the crew.
2 time-honored Hollywood tricks are used to conceal the fact that filming is taking place inside a tank. First, it is surrounded by an enormous painted backdrop of the sky and distant buildings. The other technique used allows water to flow over the walls. This prevents the audience from seeing the edge of the tank, creating the illusion of a horizon. The flood portrays some of the havoc nature inflicts on the Midwest, but there is another deadly phenomenon that assaults the region as well. America's heartland is devastated by approximately 800 tornadoes a year, more than any other place on Earth. The most violent reach speeds of 300 miles per hour, enough to demolish entire neighborhoods. These deadly yet hauntingly beautiful forces of nature are the subject of one of the most popular disaster films ever made. Twister.
Twister is a very unusual film. I think almost the first of the new breed of disaster films, you could say, because firstly it was built so much on a foundation of special effects. And the movie was so all-enveloping because the effects were so spectacular.
Special effects supervisor John Fraser was once again responsible for much of the big screen mayhem. He and his team generated the explosions, high winds, and flying debris that plagued the film's storm chasers, played by Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt.
To do the reaction shots of the actors, they had to have wind machines. Not only did they have an army of Ritter fans, but they actually had a jet engine mounted on an 18-wheeler, a commercial jet engine that would, with a hopper above it that dropped debris down that blew at us.
The night before we started shooting, there was an awesome thunderstorm, thunder and lightning storm. And as an actor, you always hope that there'll be some omen that you were born to play the part, or that you're, you know, perfectly suited. The night before this movie started, I was lying in my bed going, if there were a tornado coming, I would run the other way.
That's got me.
In addition to storm conditions, Fraser rigged a number of other physical effects, known in the industry as gags. They included a collapsible house and a powerful pneumatic ratchet for uprooting the boards of a picket fence.
Yeah, there is. You can see that this is all added dust.
Yeah.
Helicopters were used to send trees sailing and crashing. But what made Twister truly spectacular were the tornadoes themselves. For director Jan de Bont, they had to be more than visual effects. They had to be leading characters.
What interested me the most, intrigued me the most, is creating a character out of nothing. I thought that was really exciting. It's also like a fairy tale type story. It's the big monster coming out of the sky.
Twister's cast of monstrous tornadoes were the first to ever be whipped to life entirely inside a computer. This monumental achievement was accomplished at Industrial Light and Magic under the leadership of visual effects supervisor Stefan Fangmeyer.
So we're going to do something about this. I think the breakthrough in terms of our CG technology was very much our control over particles.
The tornado's massive dust devils required the ILM team to control millions of tiny computer-generated dust particles. In addition to tornadoes, Fangmeyer's team would generate dozens of digital objects, including a tumbling house and a flying cow, for one of the most ambitious uses of computer-generated imagery ever seen in a disaster film. The annual destruction caused by twisters and floods rips through America's heartland with a vengeance. But in Hollywood, disasters beckon some of the film industry's most creative and brightest talents to capture the devastating magnitude of these events. In doing so, they set the stage for characters who display the strength and courage of the survivors they portray. Every year, thousands of acres of our forests are ravaged by fire, destroying homes and endangering the ever-increasing human population. The worst of these, firestorms, are born of summer heat, high wind, and bone-dry vegetation. When they occur in remote areas, they require a special breed of firefighter to put them out. They're called smoke jumpers. Their assignment, parachute into fully engulfed forests and clear breaks to prevent further spread. Portraying a smoke jumper in the action disaster film Firestorm gave former National Football League star Howie Long a new perspective on courage.
I'm sure in some ways playing in the NFL is life-threatening, but nothing to me compares to the challenge and the threat of the immediate loss of life that these guys and gals experience jumping out of planes into a forest fire. I think the courage is remarkably at a higher level.
Eric Hipke is a real smoke jumper with more than 10 years' experience.
Smoke jumpers are good for when there's fires in remote areas and they can't get people to them right away. We're pretty self-contained. We have all the food and water and tools that we need for fighting a fire. They can throw us in there, and for 2 or 3 days all they have to do is talk to us on the radio.
In Firestorm, Long is confronted by 2 ferocious fires blazing toward each other. Creating the enormous flames without burning down the entire forest is the responsibility of pyrotechnician Chris Corbold.
It was a standard formula that we used, whenever we're doing fire on sets. I think the difference about this one is it was on such a big scale. It was a huge scale.
Firestorm was filmed in wilderness areas where trees had been slated to be cleared for lumber or due to disease. Corbold's crew cut paths to set up their gear for creating propane-based flames.
It boggles the mind when they talk about how they're going to make the man-made propane flames in the background. You're thinking 10, 12 feet, and 70-foot walls of flames. Pretty remarkable, but you always felt safe.
The crew and cast wore clothing made from a fire-retardant material called Nomex. While they came very close to the fires, they were always safe thanks to Corbold's testing and precise control over his fire effects.
Whenever we did big fire sequences, we had a safety meeting where everybody got round. We told them where the danger spots were going to be, where to go, if anything should get out of control, which thank God it didn't.
Corbold's fires are complemented by computer-generated imagery created at VIFX, a digital effects studio in Culver City, California. There, visual effects supervisor John Desjardins leads a team of compositors and animators.
There are very scene-specific things in this movie where Howie Long turns around and looks up and there's this firestorm that's raging that goes 1,000 feet into the air. So you have to do it somewhere. You can't do it there, you have to manipulate it somewhere else. There's a whole range of effects that we have to do, from forest fires and large smoke to CG helicopters or parachute shots.
And I don't think we should just use the live practical elements as they are.
Digital effects supervisor Brian Hirota enhances Corbold's fires by increasing their size, controlling their speed, and adding computer-generated details.
We added in a bunch of, there's some smoke, there's some debris blowing around because of all the heat, and there's this big, enormous fire casting the reflection down on the lake.
Since the filmmakers could not have stunt people parachuting into a blazing forest, 3D animator Bill Dietrich creates digital smoke jumpers.
Our job was to add the jumpers in, make it look, seamless with the actual actors jumping out of the plane. I'm working on the guy to get his pull of the cord timed out with his jump.
The voracious firestorm created by the effects teams ignites the heart-pounding excitement that audiences expect when disaster strikes Hollywood.
There's undeniably a fascination with spectacular special effects that have to do with disaster. It's like stopping and watching a car wreck when you're driving by. It's not a pleasant thing, and yet we all sort of do.
And that fascination is what continuously inspires filmmakers to expand their magic to all new heights.
What makes disaster movies great is that there is an acknowledgement of things larger than ourselves, but then conversely, there's an acknowledgement of something very large inside human beings that allow them to get to be the equal of these disasters and survive.
No matter their catastrophe of choice, Hollywood's masters of disaster will continue to light up movie screens with incredible escapes into the terrifying worlds we hope we never experience.